Hi, folks, and thanks for joining us here at SomeFuture for episode 20 of our podcast. We are your hosts, Jack and Chris.
Hey, what's going on?
Hey, so today, guys, we're going to do something a little bit different than what we normally do. To recognize the milestone of our 20th episode and the new year, yes, we know you're hearing this a little late, but we're going to look back at some of our favorite things that we enjoyed covering last year and discuss why we think they will continue to be in the new when it comes to 2018 and beyond. Finally, we will have a special guest on to discuss what they believe the big stories of 2018 will be as we continue on with season 2 of SomeFuture. As always, we hope that you enjoy our show, and please visit our website and blog where we will post our supporting materials at www.somefuture.org. Follow us on our Twitter handle @SomeFuture, or visit us on our Facebook page, or simply connect with us on LinkedIn or Facebook. We always welcome your engagement with questions, concerns, or ideas of things you would like to hear about on our podcast by emailing us at somefuturepodcast@gmail.com or by engaging with us on social media. Now let's see what the future has in store for us in SomeFuture.
That's SomeFuture. Okay, great. So for this segment, like Jack, you were saying, we're doing something a little bit different for episode 20. And I chose 2 topics. I think you may have chosen 3, but I chose 2. And these are really meaty topics that, we have been talking about. The very first one is CRISPR. And, I don't remember what episode we talked about CRISPR directly, but I know we've been really just sprinkling CRISPR for the past, I think it's been in 3 or 4 episodes, already. So just for the viewers who don't know what CRISPR is, CRISPR-Cas9, which is also known. So CRISPR stands for the Clustered Regularly Interspersed Short Palindromic Repeats, which is a hallmark of a bacterial defense system, which serves as the basis for the CRISPR-Cas9 system. Now, what is it? Okay, so it is a genome editing technology. So in essence, we're using this technology to completely re-engineer genetics, at that level, right? So first discovered by Francisco Mojica, a scientist who's based in the University of Alicante in Spain. He proposed using this to be as a part of a bacterial immune system defending against invading viruses. So, this consisted of sort of repeating sequences of genetic code interrupted by spacer sequences. And what he found was, post-demonstration, they saw that they can actually use this technology to edit the genomes themselves. So in January 2013, the Zhang lab published the first method to actually do this engineering, where they engineered and edited the genome inside of a mouse and inside of a human cells. So, what's really totally cosmic about this and what's got people talking about it, and of course why we talked about it, is that this really just changes the complete game when it comes to medicine and or people. So the ability to edit a person's genome, the ability to edit we were talking about extinct animals, so the ability to maybe bring back a woolly mammoth, a dodo bird, along those lines. This technology, really, when you think about it, it has no limits. You could see the end of disease. You could see the end of cancer. You could see, designer babies. It's one thing that they were talking about last year, too, on some Vice episodes. So this is truly a transformational technology that we're just sort of getting into the beginning of course. Now, while there's obviously some stuff to clap about, more recently, there was a report that I read. I don't know if you saw this, Jack. It was in Popular Mechanics. Apparently, some people might be immune to CRISPR, which is kind of crazy. As I was saying, Francisco, who initiated this at the University of Alicante in Spain, this was first proposed as a way to sort of fight off bacteria. And so these editing sequences, how they remove and replace these editing sequences. And you could imagine they could do one for, let's say, if you have a predisposition for colon cancer, you have a predisposition for, any of the many diseases and ailments that we may have. Essentially, you're editing out that part and you're sticking in the good part, and you're good to go. You would not have that. Well, because this was proposed and it's being used at the bacterial level, they're saying some people actually may be immune because they have such good part of defenses to attack this bacteria that, this may not have the ability to actually help humans. So, of course, this is the very beginning. This report just came out January 10th, so this was just a couple days ago. We all know that science is a constantly evolving process. But that being said, the whole ideas about gene editing, the future of biology, being able to change RNA, DNA, tackle conditions like diabetes, acute, kidney disease, muscular dystrophy, turning essentially genes on and off. It's such an expansive ideas, fields. We're getting into ethical issues. We're getting into the possible military where you're creating superhuman armies. The end of disease as we know it, and how that would work, and how without disease, having a higher populations, and what we would do with that. So in some ways, CRISPR it wasn't just the idea of the technology itself, and of course the funny name and all that, and these stories about designer babies and whatnot. To me, it's about the future of human beings and our own biology, and us moving beyond just being doctors and being able to take care of issues as they come to us. How about we're actually getting rid of issues before they even show up? So really fascinating technology. I thought this was a perfect one to choose. I don't know about what you thought about it.
Yeah, man, I really like CRISPR-Cas9, and when this report came out, I mean, so it's still in like the peer review stage, so it's not necessarily accepted as scientific fact yet. However, most people are saying that it does look like it's something that, if our bodies will probably just simply resist. However, I mean, you have to look at it. It's not the only tool that we have. It's just the most accurate tool that we've found so far for editing strands of DNA. And you have to look at also is that it's not only used on humans. If you get to the point where it's used to edit the genes of animals and plants like GMOs, they're using it already to do that. Even if we can't get past using it in humans, which I highly doubt that we won't be able to find a workaround for this, I think it still has many uses, such as, like I said, the genetic modification of organisms such as plants and animals, because they don't have necessarily the intolerance, I guess is what you could say it, or the fighting capabilities that we have within our own bodies to fight against this. I think CRISPR-Cas9 is only just the beginning of what we're starting to realize that DNA editing can do. I mean, we've been technically editing DNA for thousands of years through, selective breeding and things like that, So it's just one of the most accurate tools that we've found. It doesn't mean the end of DNA editing. I think that, this will lead to those more tools. We'll be able to find things that will probably be even better than CRISPR-Cas9. And I think even if our bodies start rejecting it and something like that, that the potential actually outweighs the risk. There's so many things that CRISPR or a tool like it could do, such as, like you mentioned, improving intelligence, eradicating diseases. There's the possibility that it can make us live longer. If you find the gene that makes us age, that aging gene, you could, basically cut that out or replace it with something. I love CRISPR-Cas9, man. When we originally brought it up, I mean, we've had guests on the show talk about CRISPR-Cas9 and the potentials of gene editing. I love it, man. You're right. We're going to keep talking about this. This is something that, I really believe they're going to get past this because all the money that's being poured into CRISPR-Cas9 research right now is ridiculous as well. There was just a $300 million investment that I can't remember. It was a pharmaceutical company just invested with the CRISPR-Cas9 company. Like, they're going to find a workaround around this, or they're going to find a different tool, because the idea of what it can mean for society and for making us more intelligent, making us healthier, it's not going to go away. So they're going to find a work way. I firmly believe in humanity's going to find a way to make it happen.
Absolutely. And, and that not only that, there's already companies that are going forward, as you were alluding to. There's CRISPR Therapeutics, which is, it's on the stock market. So you do have the ability to invest in companies like this. This takes us into our FizBiz part of the show, but this is the future of humanity, right? We're just starting to play with this stuff. So wow, CRISPR-Cas9, gene editing, the future of biology. I thought that was a very, very good topic to pick, and
Agreement.
I can't wait to hear more about what CRISPR and or gene editing is going to do in the future. It's going to be a very, very interesting time in the next couple decades as we figure out how to do whatever we want with the human genome and other animal genomes. So it's really, really cool. The other topic I picked is also a fairly meaty topic, one that we could talk about forever, and also it was one that we sort of interspersed it in many a show. And the topic I'm talking about is artificial intelligence. So, artificial intelligence very broadly, I'm sure everybody has heard it, but, it's just intelligence displayed by machines in contrast to, our regular intelligence. So in computer science, essentially it's the study of intelligent agents, right? Any device that perceives an environment and takes action that maximizes its chances of success for a goal. So that's the Wikipedia answer. But as somebody who actually works inside of artificial intelligence, not as a technologist, but sort of as a strategist, as someone who's trying to understand this landscape, the one thing that it annoys me, and the one thing that actually I think is helpful to give clarity is that artificial intelligence, when we talk about it, I think it's better actually to talk about not big AI, the big, I think when people say AI, they think Elon Musk, they think the T1000, they think the automated everything, we're all out of jobs. And yes, all of that is a part of the AI story. That's the reason why I picked it for my topic, right? Because it was so important and it's embedded in everything. It's in every single industry. It's the future of information technology. It's going to change just about everything. But I think the technologies, though, inside of AI that make up AI, that is the stuff that is I think easier for us to parse through, right? What do I mean by that? I mean technologies like natural language processing. Everybody knows what this is. This is Alexa. This is Google Home. This is Siri. This is Microsoft Cortana. The ability to pick up text, whether it's speech to text, whether it's text to speech, whether it's the real-time translation. I know Google Translate is trying to get off the ground as well. So again, inside of AI, there's these technologies like NLP, natural language processing. Another technology inside of artificial intelligence is computer vision. So computer vision is going to find itself into things like something that can scan through, let's say, a bunch of Google images, and you've seen some of this where artificial intelligence has the ability to tell you what that image is, perhaps where it's from, maybe even take that image and then copy it and be able to redo a Rembrandt or Renoir or something along those lines. Computer vision, though, is also being used for LiDAR techniques, for autonomous vehicles, so being able to see things in front of it. So taking what the external world is, digitizing it so you can understand, what's there. There's other things like intelligent automation and or robotic process automation, which takes rudimentary white collar work such as doing analysis with Excel or using an ERP or CRM system or accounting system to go ahead and propagate some sort of efficiency when it comes to finance and accounting or HR work. Well, RPA and intelligent automation is actually automating all of these processes. So instead of having 10, 12 people working together to make sure you get hired, you may have 3 or 4 people, but because the systems have been automated and set up in such a rules-based way, we're able to automate these processes, of course. And then, of course, some of the other things that you may have heard, things like machine learning and deep learning, where you're essentially creating a set of rules similar to the RPA that's extremely well broken down, an algorithm economy, an algorithm set of rules that allows us to do extremely incredible things, such as Google creating machine and deep learning programs that can beat Breakout within 10, 15 minutes. We just had the story of AlphaGo, where the computer was able to beat the best AlphaGo player in the world. AlphaGo is, this Chinese game that's extremely complicated with over 1 million moves or something along those lines. And that we have a computer program that taught itself essentially AlphaGo. I just heard, I think this was a couple months ago, that the the computer program beat the original program. So it taught itself AlphaGo again, and it could beat the original one that beat the guy. So I mean, we're really entering a super strange world right now, where the future of humanity, AI is going to be right there, and it is going to envelop just about everything. As I was saying, from the ability to describe the meaning of words for, let's say, the deaf, the blind, right? So Facebook could enable this. You could see how AI is going to be a really big, important part of the robotic revolution. So the ability to maybe even using simulated worlds to figure out how robots would be able to deal with those simulated worlds. You need AI engines to be able to do that. Building artificial intelligence security strategies, because when you have the world of the Internet of Things, plus attached to the grid, plus all these autonomous cars, you're going to have not people kind of paying attention to this, but an AI mind to be able to make sure that your smart city is operating as efficiently as possible. So and then I think you'll see to where we're going to be going beyond just board games and like AlphaGo, and beyond just like Breakout or Donkey Kong or whatever else they're projecting that AI can beat. You will probably see AI in the next coming decades start to tackle extremely complicated problems. So we're talking things like the environment, with all the different variables that is going to take that up. Macroeconomics, so the ability to take a hard look at the macroeconomic world and make sense of it, so you can make the right business decisions and investments. Really, there is no place that AI will not go. I don't think there's not going to be a place that it will not find itself. No industry. AI is going to be a big part of the world that is going to shape us in the future. And I think we got America, or maybe not America, but the world anyway, because this is a global thing. The world got a whiff of AI last year and in the coming years. I think that the previous year it was more like, okay, what is AI? I don't want to know what it is. I think now we now know what AI is. We touch it, we see it, we hear about it, we know of it, but now we know what it is. So now it's like, okay, what are we going to do with it? And I'm super excited to see what the future of AI will be in the next couple of years. I think it's going to be truly interesting.
Dude, what if we? So I love artificial intelligence. I like talking about artificial intelligence. I know we're going to keep talking about artificial intelligence because that's part of what you do. It's what I love to read about and study. I can only imagine. So there's a lot of different scenarios that I see artificial intelligence going into. In 2018, I see it being more and more used as a tool. The idea of using facial recognition software to basically catch criminals or to track people. The idea of 2018, I think, is going to be the year where we are really starting to, and you start seeing it in 2017, 2016, where we have to come up with a framework or an outline for AI and what is right and what isn't right to do with AI. It scares the crap out of me, to be honest with you, about what China's doing with artificial intelligence, with the facial tracking software, being able to track all of its citizens and be able to literally, I mean, that's already being implemented in China right now. They're being able to see people and I think there was a news anchor in the United States who went over to China and they tried to hide from the Chinese government and they were found like in less than 10 minutes. That kind of thing where, artificial intelligence is going to lead us to, stopping crime or tracking people who are enemies of the state. There's a lot of things that AI could be used for good and for bad. And that's what scares me. I think I also think about what you're talking about with simulations. I think we're just touching the base of what that could be. Can you imagine a world where it's sped up, like inside like its own bubble, and AI is able to, because time doesn't matter to an artificial intelligence. If we can continue to increase our computing capabilities, where, maybe we can think of time going much faster, where artificial intelligence can develop faster than what we can think of as a minute, maybe a year for artificial intelligence. It's that kind of thing that I can see that's going to happen in 2018 and on. I guess my question for you, I don't want to take up too much time, but I have to ask, do you think we're going to approach a singularity, or is that just a myth?
No, I mean, singularity, of course, I believe we will be approaching it, but we're far off still. You know, I do pay very close attention to the singularity and the idea of it. So everybody knows, the singularity is where there's so much in terms of the technological world that is connected with human beings that we will not know where human being stops and the machine begins. We'll just be so integrated with it. So we're already getting to these places. AI is going to be a part of that. I think robotics is going to be a part of that. CRISPR-Cas9 is going to be a part of that. Whether it's nanorobotics, whether it is the ability to augment our reality with all sorts of AR, VR world, like all these things are coming all together. Artificial intelligence will be the lifeblood of the base of it, because it's going to automate and push all these programs and platforms in one direction. So in some ways, it is the beating, the blood and the heart that's going to be pumping out this technology, in the future. You brought up a lot of other things that are interesting about AI. Ethics is a big part of AI, I think, and it's gonna, if anything's going to slow AI down in terms of how it's going to affect the world, it's going to be the government regulations and what we choose to put in front of it. If AI is an economic engine for countries like the United States or China, you're going to see a more aggressive espionage. You may see more aggressive R&D spending. You may see more aggressive fake news that is out there. That's another thing that's going to come up that is being driven by AI. So it just, there again, both of these, CRISPR-Cas9 and AI, I think they're really meaty topics. I believe we're probably going to be bringing them up, in 2018 for sure. And I think it's something that we all should pay really, really close attention to.
Yeah, and I think that I agree with you. And one final thing I wanted to mention is that, like what you were saying with fake news, artificial intelligence, I think it's getting blown up kind of right now in news articles. That whole thing with Facebook, and that the idea of those two, artificial intelligence creating their own language, and that scared a lot of people. Where artificial intelligence is still in its infancy. Like people, there's that gimmick of that artificial intelligence, that robot that was granted
Yeah.
citizenship in Saudi Arabia. Well,
Mhm.
that's a joke. It was told to say things, and artificial intelligence is still in its infancy. It's not planning to kill anybody or anything like that right now. It can't think on its own without inputs from human beings right now.
Yep.
So that it is in its infancy, but there are a lot of dangers to what it could become. And
Yes.
that's what a lot of what our show is going to focus on in the future, is what artificial intelligence, the goods and the bads of what it could do.
Totally agree, and I also agree with you that we're very early in AI, right? So yes, it can beat AlphaGo. You have IBM Watson. That's always the thing that's put out there. Oh, here's this thing. The thing is that there was a lot of moving parts behind a lot of these technologies that are being created. Being in the information technology services industry, it still has a way to go in order to have really specific, well done AI, automate everything and get rid of all our jobs, right? So we still have a long way to go. I don't think there's anything to worry about in the near term, maybe some decades from now, which we'll be talking about. We can discuss it. But in the end, both CRISPR and Cas9, our audience just needs to not only understand what these things are and how they're going to work and benefit and or hurt society, but also I think it's good to know what do these broad things mean. The idea of being able to change your biology, the idea to be able to augment the economy or augment human life with technology. All of this is an extremely powerful engine for who we can be as human beings on planet Earth. So as long as we use it properly, I'm really looking forward to some future ahead.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna jump into my remembering the top some future topics of 2017. One thing that really kind of that I really wanted to talk about is the future of energy production, because I think we talk about energy a lot on this show. That's something that we've talked about with nuclear fission, with the possibilities of renewable energies and climate change. That's something that we've discussed a lot of.
We talked with futurist Gary Golden as well about the future of energy, which I thought was great.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that we've mentioned, and I think we're going to continue to mention. One thing that I think is really cool, there's a website called lifeboat.com where they talk about the future of energy. It's pretty neat. It posits the idea of a world very near in the future of 2020, 2025, where we are energy independent as a country. The United States is energy independent, and that's actually already happening. It's pretty neat things that in the 1970s, the 1980s, 1990s, even people couldn't even imagine a world where the United States was energy independent, where we were so reliant on oil and from the Middle East and from other countries like Canada and Mexico. Well, we are now one of the world's largest oil producers. It's just a fact now, and we're actually exporting energy. And what's really happening is you're seeing this a lot in a lot of industrialized countries. Every other day, you see an article about Denmark, where they have now, I think, over 25% of their energy is based off of wind power. I think that I wanted to touch on this because I recently took a cross country trip across the United States. And while I was driving through Kansas and driving through Nebraska, I was amazed at the amount of wind farms that were in existence. I had no idea that vast swaths of our countryside are being transformed to produce energy and renewable energy. And I think that we're going to be talking in 2018 a lot about the future of energy in this country and in the world. I think that energy is going to only continue to increase the amount of output that we have. And I think we're going to come to a point where energy is going to become so cheap that it's going to be accessible by anyone for nearly nothing or for free. And a lot of energy companies would be very upset with that idea, but I think that is going to be the way we're moving towards. And we're not only going to be talking about renewable energies, but ways to fix the issues that we've had when it comes to the issues that we've created burning fossil fuels. And even if you don't believe in that stuff, you still believe that we should probably edit the climate that we have.
Yeah.
And, maybe alter the climate that we have so that we can avoid things like the hurricane issues that we've experienced in Houston and other parts of the United States, and maybe start changing our planet in a positive way and helping species and things like that so that we don't have these issues and we can not only predict them, but we can prevent them in the future. What do you think about that, Chris?
Well, I mean, you're hit on a bunch of stuff there. I mean, there's a lot, right, to definitely unpack. The one thing that I think I hear in your voice, and it's one thing I think about as well, is that the future of energy is definitely the mix, right? We can't go from straight hydrocarbon straight to the renewable source. It's very costly. There is an infrastructure that's already built that we've built upon it. The fact that the economy is still based on hydrocarbons as well, and from the petrodollar to the whole energy economy. The fact that we have this glut of natural gas that we can use, and it's actually even it's a little bit cleaner than coal fired stuff, and just we're constantly still bettering the capability of solar. We're bettering the capability of geothermal, the wind. I mean, there's so much in terms of the direction of the future of energy that I think the mix is forgotten. I think we think of, let's go to all windmills now. Let's go to all solar now. And unfortunately, there are issues. And Gary, he spoke on this too, that you can't just switch off, right? And so we have to make sure that mix is there as best as we can. And that means optimizing everything. That means optimizing solar, optimizing wind, optimizing geothermal, and optimizing hydrocarbons. We're going to have to use them. It's going to propel, the huge, big new middle class of the world, which is, Brazil, India, China. They cannot go directly to the grid. It's just impossible as of right now, right? But they are leading, the future of energy because they're doing a lot of investment in the renewables as well. I think renewables are the future. I just think there's going to be a mix. Now, one thing that I think is going to be really important to take a look at is how the United States stewards the future of renewable energy under the Trump administration. Obviously, they are, they're definitely putting their, their chips in hydrocarbons, and that of course is natural gas and the oil industry. And it'll be interesting to see if the United States becomes a laggard when it comes to the future of the energy, behind other countries like China or Germany, which some would even say are ahead for sure. So, I think that's something to pay attention to in 2018 and beyond. But one thing we should always remember, it's the mix. We can't throw out hydrocarbons. Those are still going to power, much of the Earth's, resources. And so we're going to have to remember we've got to just make sure that we do our best job to propel the grid system and propel, the energy of the world. Because you and I mean, if it wasn't for either coal or natural gas powered electricity, you and I wouldn't be making this podcast, because that's what really, what's turning on our laptops and turning on our microphones,
Well, and if you remember, we actually did an episode when we were really out there when it came to space exploration and the advancement of society. When we looked, hundreds of even thousands of years into Earth's future, the idea of how much energy that we can create is only going to continue to exponentially grow. We're not going to slow down. I think it was in the 1970s they actually wrote that we were running out of energy sources in the world, and that's actually turned out not to be the case. That we are only increasing the amount of energy sources that we have, and that those energy sources are going to multiply and exponentially grow, and that obviously the amount of energy that we're going to be needing to use is going to exponentially grow as well. But isn't that the point of humanity? That when we have a problem, we solve it. We find a way to to create these these new solutions to problems that we ourselves create. But that's part of humanity's ever-ending goal. So yeah, so that's I know. Sorry, I got a little.
It's fine. You're doing fine, man. You're doing fine. No, energy is. I totally agree. Yeah. It's something that, of course, it's going to propel us for a while, and we need to always talk about it, because it's just so it's so important. What was the other thing that you picked up too for the other topic?
Yeah. So the other one that I wanted to talk about was the.
Should we do? Wait, are we going to do all three, or should we just do two?
We can do the two. We'll talk about the third one, I'm sure.
We've got too much stuff to talk about. There's
much stuff. Yeah, that's why we're continuing on with this podcast, season 2. Yeah. So the other one I have is the future of society. I think that is something that we're going to continue to touch on, even though we are, we kind of, say that we're a tech show. We also are a futurist show, and that means that we look at not only the future of technology, but its impact on society in the future. And I think that that piggybacks off of the energy idea. What constitutes a right? What constitutes a human right? If you look at the UN's website, what they consider a human right is something that is inalienable, that can't be denied to people. That it's something that's integral to being a human being. And if they actually have several paragraphs on what that could mean and what countries are attributing to that. And I think that if you look at energy may end up becoming a right. We've discussed other types of rights. We've discussed, maybe the right to a functioning government. Maybe that will be considered a human right, or maybe
the right to the internet, right? So having the right to a free-flowing internet. Mm-hmm.
But right now there's over 1 billion people who don't have access to even energy. So while we can discuss this, these are things that are being solved. Like Mark Zuckerberg with his project to put hot air balloons in the lower atmosphere to give internet to underserved communities. These are things that are slowly becoming rights. I can't imagine if you took a modern teenager right now and said no internet for even a month, how insane that would drive them in the United States. But that's something that we are slowly adapting to what our idea of what a human right is. And obviously, one thing that being a slightly conservative, as you and I discuss, I love this idea of. So South Park actually recently came out with this idea of they mocked America's victim culture, which
Sure.
I thought was awesome, because they talked about DNA and me and 23 and me.
Mm-hmm.
people can research their background. And I think that we have to be cautious about that too, because not everyone in our society can be a victim or can play the victim. We also have to realize that these things are human rights, but
Hmm.
to an extent, like things like the internet. Obviously, you don't need the internet to survive.
Yeah.
Maybe need the internet to advance in our modern day society, but that's the idea of where you have to be cautious about what is a human right and what is, and even the UN goes into this to discuss, what is a human right and what is a privilege, or what is something that we've come to accept as a necessity in our society, but we have to look at the poorest countries, and they don't even have access to some of these things that we would consider, that you
Yeah.
and I definitely consider human rights, like
Yeah.
clean water and food. So these are things that we're going to touch on, and we're going to. This is why you and I do so well on this podcast, is because we have some very interesting and differing opinions on these things. So that's something I think we're going to talk about a lot too. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think as you were alluding to, right, we're always talking about technology, the energy, robots, this kind of sexy future stuff, right? Like always, that's stuff we're always bringing up. But where the rubber meets the road is actually that all of this, we're still people. We're still on this floating ball, around this star system in the base of some Milky Way galaxy that's one of thousands, right? And we're still just trying to figure out how to like keep going, how to keep this thing going. And keeping this thing going involves people and interacting with each other. Society and culture is a huge part of future studies. It's a huge part of foresight. And actually, to me, it's like the one part that we forget about, right? You say, oh, we're going to just have AI and we're going to automate everything. Okay, what happens when there is a difference between having a job versus not having a job, and how will that impact society? How will the ability of not being able to connect with people face to face, but only seeing them through like this podcast where we're doing this through Skype? How will that affect how we build relationships? When we were talking about the less birth rates happening right in Japan, there's not a lot of people that are having sex there, tons of singles. How does that shape society? We talked about the government and the future of government, the rise of authoritarian regimes. You're talking about, right, the power of China as a major global power. They're authoritarian. They control their social media. They put dissenters in jail. And if we are seeing a waning dominance of American regard and ideal due to the current administration, future administrations, just the degradation of the American power, which could be on the way. Who will take a step in and lead? Will it be authoritarian China? Will it be, laissez-faire, other countries that put economics before society? Will it be the tightly controlled mechanistic, EU policies that may, technocratic and neoliberal in nature? The future of government, the future of society could go a lot of different places. And I don't know about you, but 2017 was just a bunch of stuff happening all over the place, not only domestically in the United States, but internationally in a weird way that it's frightening to people. I think the technology is coming too fast, and I think people are like, whoa, just slow down a little bit, and so in some ways I think the future of at least society and culture is more actually, let's slow down, let's actually talk to our neighbors, let's figure out what's real and what's not. I honestly, the future of society and connection is something that we always miss, I think, when we look at future studies, because we're always looking at the sexy stuff. So I'm really glad you picked that topic, because it should resonate with our audience. But not only should it resonate, but I think it's something that is really important that everyone should key on. We still are people. We still need to love each other and connect with each other and just try to work with one another. And sometimes this technology gets in the way, but to me, we still have the ability to use reason, logic, and capability to usher and steward the future of humanity for not only decades but a millennia to come.
Yeah, we need to look past bipartisanship, man. That's the thing I have to say.
For sure, man. All right. Well, hey, that was our quick wrap up. It was, just four things. We could talk infinitely about, what's happening, what happened in 2017. Really looking forward to 2018, continuing these conversations. It's going to be a great year.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So for Paleo Futures, I did something different, and I know it was wrong, and I'm not supposed to ever do anything different, but the subject here is so awesome that I had to talk about it, right? So if you guys pay attention to the show, Paleo Futures generally is about an old school futures, either a person, so like a futurist from the past, a topic, a book, a short story, a movie, television show, anything along those lines. We picked it. But for the one that we're doing now, I actually chose a show that is you would consider modern. And so I cheated a little bit, but the television show is so good that I had to be able to bring this up. And I've actually broken it down by season 2. So we'll talk a little bit about the different seasons and how they evolve in other podcasts. So hey, why not? So I chose Black Mirror, which started in, I believe, 2013. Was that it? Yeah, 2011. Pardon me. So, yeah. So Black Mirror is a British television series. So it's BBC. You're going to see a lot of really famous Brit actors on there as well. And it's very unique because each episode is its own vignette, its own story, right? So it's what they call an anthology series. So you can see it disjointed. You could see, season 3, season 2, season 4, and it doesn't matter because they don't connect. Everything is unique. So I don't, we're going to try to not deal with any spoilers here or anything like that. But I would just like to talk about these shows because they're such great full future shows to talk about, and I just couldn't discuss them. Plus they're just super fun. They're really well done. BBC does really great work. I'm a big fan of BBC work, so this stuff's super cool. So we started out with the 2011 season. The 2011 season has 6 episodes, and I think you'll see as we go through some of these shows essentially what Black Mirror is, and it's probably tried to say this, but it's kind of the 21st century Twilight Zone, right? So the Twilight Zone, when it came out in the 50s and 60s, it was this sort of razor sharp, well-written show that used fascinating kind of eerie stories to kind of talk a little bit about how we act in society, right? So how we interact with each other, how culture is driven by, different things. So whether it's racism, whether it is paranoia, whether it's horror and how we deal with it, the Twilight Zone really was a rich show for that. And Black Mirror is a little bit different because what Black Mirror does is it uses technology that we use currently, and then it extrapolates what that technology is going to do to us in the future. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about this, and I'm going to skip around because I'm going to skip the first one because it doesn't directly put in this technology and extrapolates it because it's actually a little bit too acute, a little bit too could happen tomorrow. So I'll come straight back to this, but to give somebody an idea, this episode is episode 3, and it's one of my favorite Black Mirror episodes. It's called The Entire History of You. So essentially, there is a implant. There's a grain that's put behind the ear, and it allows people to record anything they see and hear. And then using a remote control, they can essentially do a redo. So if me and Jack, if we're talking about, in 20 years, oh, hey, remember when we were doing that podcast and we were talking about Black Mirror? Remember that? We can hit a button and that will go up to a television, and we can view us having the same conversation and just, laugh at the merriment and everything like that. So, naturally, when you record everything and you see everything, some things could get complicated because I think in some ways there's like too much information. And of course, this episode is about what happens when technology goes bad. And in some ways, that's sort of the MO of Black Mirror. What happens when we can record everything, and how does that impact our relationships? How does it impact, us trying to get a job? How does it impact us being completely obsessed with how somebody interacted with us and what was their body language and whatnot. So, I mean, the entire history of you, I thought, was a fascinating way to kind of view that extrapolation. And, what's really great too about Black Mirror is that, it's really well acted. It's really well crafted. It's sort of it seems like it's 5 or 10 years down the line, but it's credible. The situations are real. So, there was, of course, in this episode, this gets extremely complicated for the couple who are using this, interacting with this technology. But, that's what Black Mirror is there to do. Black Mirror is there to mess with you, and it's there to kind of, show you that this technology that we use, that we love, could cause harm in unexpected ways. So, I don't know. Now, of course, there's 3 other episodes, or excuse me, 5 other episodes. There was one called The National Anthem, where it involved social media and what would happen if social media blackmailed the Prime Minister of England. There was another one where there's a person who was operating in a virtual game machine, and they're operating off merits and how that works. Be Right Back is about how somebody died, but they were able to recreate this person due to their social media mentions, and how that could be you and that couldn't be you, just based on the social media that you write out there. And then White Bear was White Bear. I think I forget this one, but it's a woman. She wakes up with amnesia. And all of a sudden she's being hunted, by these people. And the Waldo moment, that's a particularly interesting one because it's about a vulgar comedian or like bear thing. It's like a computer like simulation thing, but everybody loves this, and it runs as a candidate for office. And what do you know? What happens when the reality show bear becomes actually a powerful figure? What happens when you have a troll for
the way,
right? Well, exactly right. This came out in 2011. So
yeah.
And this is just 6 episodes. They're about an hour and a half. Really well done. Of course, like I was saying, BBC, great acting along the way. Fascinating to take a look at. Highly, highly recommend it. You can check out Black Mirror on Netflix. What did you take a look at this season and some of these episodes?
Yeah, man, I actually watched. I think I watched all of them. I've watched the most recent ones too, but I'll stick with season 1. So I think that I like the episode that you really went into with about the guy who has the thing that can basically record everything, and everybody's got one. You just think about Google Glass and think about people hated that technology because they were afraid that it would constantly recording them or constantly taking pictures of them. So, I mean, these are technologies that could exist now, and that, that just could be, if they're popularized, it could, lead to some serious issues. I mean, can you imagine, like what you were saying, can you imagine, if some things you did as a kid came up on the internet when you were trying to apply for a job? Yeah. It's just these kinds of things that I like Black Mirror, and I actually feature one of the episodes in my class because cool. So I have my students watch this because I think that this is a realistic thing that you have to think about. If you work in technology or if you're creating technology, you have to look at these issues. When you have to say, well, what can my product, even if it's originally designed to do something else, what can my product be used to do that is, not what I intended it for it to be used as, but could be used for evil. And I think a lot of Black Mirror, focuses around some of these negative issues that could happen. I mean, the show creator stated that this is something that could happen in 10 minutes if we aren't careful. I mean, that's what he said. So that's his idea when he created this, is that there's this idea that if we aren't careful with the technology that we are creating, that if we aren't putting standards and restrictions on this technology, these are some of the things that could lead us down a very, very dark path. And I think that that's very nice because a lot of what you see in technology, or at least in the news about technology, is all mostly positive. Yeah, I think this is a way for, I guess, the pessimists to rejoice in the fact that this is something this is something that could exist. This is something that could happen if we're not careful. So I really love this series, and I mean, like I said, I have my students watch one of the episodes. And they end up watching probably all of it after I have them watch it. So it's great, man. I'm glad, even though it's not Paleo Futures, I like it because it's something that would be fun, that is fun to talk about, and that's something that everyone should go and see.
So the idea of future studies, right, is not just tracking the technology, but it's actually thinking and ideating about how the technology will impact the future, right? So Black Mirror does a great job of simulating the future world that's not even that far away, right? Like some of this could happen right next year, right? The technology is right there, right? Or it's happening now in many versions, right? I mean, Facebook itself, right, is having a troubled time trying to figure out what to do with the fact that they are now one of the biggest media corporations in the world and how to use that power properly. They didn't have a Black Mirror that came out in 2007 that talked about their leading this social network that allowed anybody to write anything, and in turn that means they could write stuff that's completely fake and then change the capabilities of whole groups of people and their vision of what their country could be and how they vote, and in turn how power kind of is shaped around the world. So it's that's just one aspect of the world that needs futures, that needs simulated futures to talk to you about the positive and the negative effects. And Black Mirrors does that for us. Can't wait to talk about the second, third, and fourth season. We'll sprinkle that throughout the year. But yeah, Black Mirror, go check it out, guys. It's on Netflix. I think you'll really dig it.
All right, to go from that serious topic to one maybe not as serious. All right, folks, it's time for FizBiz.
FizBiz. All right.
It's time down to the dollars and the bitcoins. So here's our disclaimer, folks. Like always, I have to say this because we're not responsible for your losses, as these are clearly only our opinions. So please don't sue us. We don't have any money anyway.
We don't. Not much anyway. Yes. We're working on it, but not much now.
All right. So several episodes ago, I talked about Bitcoin and other forms of digital currency like Ethereum. And like I said, I urged people to avoid what I considered to be a scam. Well, now Bitcoin is over $13,000, $13,500, and other digital currencies are actually increasing in value as well. And I put quotations around the word value. So you may be saying, like some of our listeners who can continue to email me, geez, Jack, you were so wrong. That was the nice way that I'm putting it. I did want to bring this up again because I'm getting asked this question not only by students, not only by my family members, because they think if you work in IT that you're like a doctor and you know everything, because everyone asks the doctor, oh, my foot's bothering me, even if they're not a podiatrist. So I feel like that's kind of what's happening with IT, but sorry, I'm getting off topic. But I'm double downing on my stance. Bitcoin is something that will end up costing people millions of dollars. I imagine it like in a scenario much like the 1920s when the stock market crashed. When the market crashed, people raced to banks to get to their money, and banks shuttered their doors, and people ended up losing significant portions of their wealth. This has happened time and time again in multiple societies. Just because it's digital doesn't mean that it won't happen again. And I think that the same could happen because it's unregulated, uninsured Bitcoin exchanges, even though they say they're insured. The world of Bitcoin is not something that I agree that will not disappear overnight, but I do believe it will disappear. Countries like China, where most of the world's Bitcoin mining currently takes place, and Russia are already moving to ban the currency from their soil. And I guarantee you only more countries will continue to do so. Countries and governments do not like their currency being out of their control and will create their own digital currencies backed by government treasuries to ensure that they do not lose this control. While a universal currency that is left to the flow of the free market sounds nice, governments can hardly agree on trading cheese, much less relinquishing control of their currency. So if you want to invest in Bitcoin, or have already done so, and you continue to look at this miraculous growth and what Bitcoin aficionados will say will only continue, I have to caution you that when Bitcoin falls and it will fall. You will either need to be prepared to get out fast or be prepared to lose your investment when the Bitcoin banks will shutter their doors and you find yourself unable to take your investment out.
Mm.
Um, so, Chris,
Yeah.
tell me your views. I know we've talked about Bitcoin a lot, and I'm sorry to bring it up, but I'm getting emails. I'm getting,
Yeah.
Thanksgiving. All the family members are asking me about
Mhm.
Bitcoin. Tell me your thoughts on Bitcoin.
I honestly, man, I am totally in agreement with you. What's so, and this is what's really bothering me about this, right? Is that our futurist friends and the people that are kind of taking a look at what the future of the world can be. A lot of these people are hippies, they're hippy dippy people, right? They want an interconnected world. We don't, we're in this era of abundance, and we can vertical farm with robots, and everyone can have a 3D printed home, and we don't have to have money because we're in Star Trek universe now, right? And it's a very egalitarian, happy, next generation world that we're creating. And Bitcoin and or the blockchain, the distributed ledger system, this technology was going to be a part of that, because it was going to open up us to know how commerce is exchanged. You can use the blockchain and distributed ledger technology to understand how things are paid, so you won't have things like Medicare fraud, the $200 hammers that we have when you have the military. This is going to revolutionize how we do finance and accounting for corporations, going to level the playing field for the little guy as well as keep the big guy at bay. This was very powerful, right? And it was going to be a great equalizer for the mess that is global economics. Well, the futurists, they just forgot about all that. They forgot about all that. And they became capitalists. These futurist guys that are so interested in seeing the world come. All of a sudden, I got in early. I just happened to own 10 Bitcoin, and now it's worth 10,000. So who cares? Who cares what it is in terms of the exchange and the block ledger system, the distributed ledger, and how great and informed. I'm making money. It's fine. I'm going to put this money away so I can buy, the newest HTC Vive or whatever the heck people are going to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
The real issue is here is that the blockchain and or Bitcoin, Ethereum, doesn't matter what you use here. It's a currency, right? The currency is going to be used to buy things. There's nobody who can purchase bread or their 3D printed house or their new sexy foldable iPhone with a currency that changes value, sometimes 20, 30, 100% over a week. Can you imagine going to do a purchase and you not having the amount of money because the value either it went down or went below the threshold that you did? The currencies are not supposed to work that way. They're supposed to have what economists and what people in the trade call fundamentals. So there's an understanding of what value means. And so unfortunately, as you were alluding to, Bitcoin became, less about the using this currency as something that's valuable, that's taken away from the fractional reserve and global international banking system that puts it to be this more fair, way. And in turn, it turned into what everything happens in free market capitalism sometimes, which is the capitalist pigs come and they draw up the value in a winner take all system, and and it's the gold rush, and you see people who are going to try to get rich. So I agree, you can't have some minimum wage Guatemalan immigrant get paid in Bitcoin because she's got to pay the bills, and she can't afford to be able to have her money just volatile, like it's be able to change value like that. It's insane. So I think, yes, it's great to understand, to play with this stuff. Obviously you can have fractions of Bitcoin, which makes it a little bit different than regular monetary exchange, but the valuation has gotten out of control. It's a completely scary thing. And as you said, the powers that be, the big financial powers of the world, to include, China and other, and some, and even Microsoft. And I think Microsoft stopped using Bitcoin as a form of exchange because it's too volatile. People will start to put the clamps on it because it's out of control. And in the end, what's going to happen? There's going to be a lot of people holding the bag, and will be having, they will be able to retain some value, but not the same value that they're retaining now. And it's to what I tell my friends, like, it's like Beanie Babies 10 years ago. There's like people with these really expensive Beanie Babies that you were supposed to have, the tulip revolution in the 1600s in the Netherlands. What is really the value of a Bitcoin? And, what is it? It doesn't exist. And because it doesn't necessarily exist, and we haven't figured out that framework, that means it is whatever it wants to be. And now it's just the eyeballs that go down. And I don't know if you saw, there was like a company, they changed their name to Bitcoin or blockchain. I forgot what it was. And their stock went up like immediately. So, I mean, so it's off of nonsense. The valuation is off of nonsense. We need to get back down to straight to brass tacks. And we need to get these futurists out of the capitalist game and get them back to saying the most important part of this technology is the technology itself, not the cash grab to go make money off of something that seems super cool and extra. So, let me get off my my soapbox here. I'll put it away. But I mean, there's so many problems that I have with Bitcoin right now, and I'm sure you'd like to comment on it too.
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head, man. These hippy dippy people who are propagating it, I think that's exactly it. Is that it's all speculative, and these people are adding to that speculation because they themselves own the Bitcoin. They want the value to go up. So they're saying, oh, buy Bitcoin. It's going to continue to go up. It's going to be awesome. Keep buying it. And what it is they're saying buy it so that mine will be worth more. So it's a never ending, like, it's going to keep going up and up and up and up. And when they're not even expressing the real dangers of it because they themselves have already invested in it and don't want to acknowledge those so that the currency will go down. I mean, there's literally nothing to back it. It's not like people are treating it like a stock. But it's not a stock, because stocks, you have realistic facts and figures that the companies put out of their earnings, of what they're doing as a company. People, they have shareholders, and they're deciding things that that are good for the company. And that's a slower back and forth pendulum swing, if it does swing at all or very little. I think I don't want to keep talking about this, because I do want to talk about blockchain, and I want to talk about blockchain because I think it is a really cool underlying technology that's behind Bitcoin. However, I think, and if you want to invest in something, I think you should take a look at that. I think its uses are only expanding, and we're going to cover that in a second, because you have to understand that Bitcoin is only something that exists because of blockchain technology, and that Bitcoin is not the only thing that can exist on this technology. So many people that's all that's in the news, that's all they think and hear of. But you have to imagine that blockchain, as you said, is a giant ledger that everyone can see all over the world in real time, and it's multiple ledgers. But so that it's a ledger that anyone can see all over the world in real time, so that you can have information that is constantly updated and shared, and that's nearly impossible to hack because of the encryption techniques and the keys that are required, and like if you own a part of that blockchain. Therefore, the application of blockchain, I think, is only going to continue to grow, like I said. In fact, I wanted to mention some really cool things that a company that I'm sure we've all heard of called IBM has done with blockchain, and just this past year. So in October, IBM actually, in collaboration with this group called Stellar.org and ClickX Group, announced a blockchain solution to enable cross-border payments on the blockchain at reduced settlement time and cost. So it's already processing live transactions in 12 currency corridors across the Pacific Islands in Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. Pretty cool. Education. So Sony Corporation and Sony Global Education worked with IBM to develop a new blockchain-based student education records platform. Under that new system, school administrators can consolidate and manage students' educational data from several schools, as well as record and refer their learning history and digital academic transcripts with more certainty, which brings more efficiency in education. There's food safety. An estimated 600 million people, almost 1 in 10 people in the world, fall sick after eating contaminated food, and 420,000 deaths are reported every year, resulting in the loss of 33 million healthy life years, according to the World Health Organization's fact sheet. To tackle that issue and ensure greater consumer confidence in the global food system, a group of 10 food producers and retailers, Dole, Driscoll's, Golden State Foods, Kroger, big companies, have used IBM blockchain to solve those issues by working together and consolidating where the food's coming from, who's selling it. All of those things are really important. IBM is working on, and it's not just IBM, it's other companies too. They're working on identity technologies, insurance technologies, basically being able to have a smart contract-based insurance policy, private equity trading. So that's one thing, obviously, that I'm partial to. Shipping. There's just so many possibilities for blockchain. And I think that, we're going to continue to touch on it. And yeah. Bitcoin, because we're going to continue to be asked about Bitcoin. And we're going to be like, everyone's going to be like, no, you guys are wrong. And then we're not going to be proven right until Bitcoin just like implodes. But, which could happen tomorrow, which could happen 10 years from now. I mean, that's but we're saying that it's going to happen. Yeah. So, because, look at the digital currencies that are being developed by China, Russia, even Estonia is creating their own digital currency. So like we caution all of our listeners, it's important to remember to invest wisely. Because, there's this one guy, so my cousin came up to me and said that he took out, this guy, not my cousin, a friend of his at work, took out his 401k and invested it all in Bitcoin, which just blew my mind, and which I am advising you do not do. Because if it appears to be too good to be true, then it probably is.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed. I am definitely not all in, but in when it comes to the blockchain. Exactly what you were talking about. Smart contracts, essentially the blockchain, for those who don't know, it's a way to timestamp all your transactions. And so, musicians are actually using this for a way to sell their music directly to their listeners without having to even have a record company in between as the go-between. So you can send it, you immediately know that they paid for it, you have it come right out. This goes with anything. This can be with an artist. So you ensure that the art that you buy is actually really done by the artist. So you can timestamp, you time and date stamp. This is real. This came from me. So what this is it's as we were alluding to before. It's the equalizer. It's a way to take the dirtiness and the black and gray of markets and actually turn them into white markets, right? That may be a term we may be using in the future, where you have a white ethical marketplace that doesn't have a lot of corruption, or maybe be devoid of corruption, because we're able to identify exactly where the money, came from and how it was distributed amongst this distributed ledger. So, as you were saying, Bitcoin, it's definitely a bubble for sure. But that underlying technology, that's not a bubble. It's another lifeblood of the future of the 21st century. And I think we all need to be aware of how it can impact us.
Okay, great. So for the interview segment of the podcast today, we have Brian David Johnson. So Brian David Johnson, the future is really Brian David Johnson's business, which is really perfect. So he works with organizations as a futurist, develop an actionable 10 to 15-year vision, what it feels like to live in the future. So his work is called Futurecasting, which uses ethnographic field studies, technology research, cultural history, trend data, global interviews, and science fiction to provide a pragmatic roadmap of the future. So he's been an applied futurist, working in government, trade organizations, startups, multinational corporations to help them envision their future, but also specify the steps needed to actually get there. So Johnson's currently a futurist in residence at Arizona State University's Center for Science and Imagination, a professor in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society, and director of the ASU Threatcasting Lab, and is a futurist and fellow at Frost & Sullivan. Did I get that bio pretty good there for you, Brian?
You did it all. That's great. Thank you so much.
All right, fantastic. Well, I know we're a little bit pressed for time, so I want to get right in here. But I think one of the first questions I have, especially when it comes to somebody of your regard and the work that you do is really in your corporate work. Because I think sometimes when people hear the word futurist, they're like, "What the heck does that mean? What does this person even do?" So, can you just give our audience a little bit of an understanding of what does it take in order to do the work of a corporate futurist, sort of in the corporate world?
Certainly. So, as you said, Chris, at the beginning, I'm an applied futurist, and so what that means is I go and model futures for organizations, and then figure out what steps they need to take to get there. Most of the organizations that I work with, I'm looking 10 to 15 years out and modeling both positive and negative futures, and then turning around and looking backwards and saying, okay, what are the steps we need to do to get there? Probably the best example of the type of work that I did is I was the chief futurist at the Intel Corporation, the chip company. And for them, it takes them about 10 years to design, develop, and deploy a chip. So it was of vital business importance today for them to know what people would want to do 10 years from now. And so it was really nuts and bolts. I'm an engineer and a designer by training. So I would do the future casting work, and then I would write a spec. And it would be a requirements document to say, here's how people will want to act and interact with technology 10 years from now. And then we'd set about, start building the chip, look at the hardware, look at the software, look at what mergers and acquisitions, look what patents we need to write. I've got about 50 patents. So although it sounds like when people say that you're a futurist, or if you're over in England, they would call me a futurologist. It sounds a little bit like it's kind of black box or black arts, but it's really not. It's actually quite pragmatic. And that's really the work that I do with organizations. I either help spec out what their products need to look like, or oftentimes I'll work with the board of directors to say, okay, what does the company need to look like 10 years from now? And then what do we need to start doing today to get there?
Yeah, and I think that's really great, because I was reading, some of your favorite quotes are, or at least one of them anyway, was, don't let the future happen to you. And I mean, I think that sounds a little cheeky maybe to some of our viewers, but I actually think I know, what that means. And in some ways, I think it's exactly what you're describing, which is, and of course, I'm going to have you kind of take this away from me as well if I screw it up. But don't let the future happen to you. To me means, I'm improperly prepared to actually handle the future. So it's better actually to see it happen before, so you can act properly. So what does, I guess, that quote mean to you? And was that some of the work that you were doing, as you were saying, when you worked there as a corporate futurist for Intel?
Definitely. The work that I do as a futurist, and specifically future casting and its variant Threatcasting, says and embraces the fact that the future is built by people. People build the future. And oftentimes, over the last 25 years, when I go out and speak to people, everybody says, BDJ, how do I prepare for the future? Or what's sort of coming in the future? And I try to get people to understand is that people create the future. It's created by people. It's created by organizations. It's created by militaries and churches and communities, that people actually build the future, that the future is local. And the fact that everybody can build their own future. And if you don't do that, if you're a passive participant, that's where you let the future happen to you. If you don't become an active participant in that. And that's what I work with, again, corporations and organizations, and all the way down to individuals, and oftentimes young students, actually getting them to understand that they can build their own future. And it's just a matter of envisioning what that is, and then start taking the steps to get there. Because if you don't do that, and you let the future happen to you, it means you're letting somebody else design your future for you. And that never has a good outcome.
So I have a question for you, and it's more centered around, I think it kind of builds off what you were just saying, threat casting. Can you explain to our audience what threat casting is and how you use it in your different scenarios that you were just bringing up?
Yes. So threat casting is a variant of this notion of future casting. So future casting looks out at both positive and negative futures, and then we backcast for organizations and people about how to get there. The variant of threat casting I came up with about 10 years ago, and it follows the same process of looking at social science, technical research, of cultural history, of economic and trend data, as well as global interviews to model possible threats. So looking 10 years out, looking at possible threats, and then turning around and looking backwards and saying, okay, how do we disrupt, mitigate, and recover from those threats? And I've used it in the corporate world. I also do quite a lot of work with militaries and governments using it to think about national security, to think about economic stability. And more recently, almost a year ago, we actually launched it on Valentine's Day of last year, 2017. We launched the Arizona State University Threatcasting Lab. I'm the director of the lab, and the lab is really a think tank where we convene together people from government and military, from private industry, from academia, as well as trade associations and foundations to get together physically in a room for 2 days, and we do this threat casting. We look at the future of cyber threats, of biological threats, you name it, and then we model it multiple times. It's an effects-based model. And then from that, we figure out how to disrupt, mitigate, and recover from it. And then the lab writes a report that is a threat casting report. It's open to the public. Again, Arizona State University is a large public university, so nothing is classified. And really the goal is to identify those threats, number one, but also to talk to people about what steps we can take. Because I think oftentimes when we're thinking about these threats, and specifically these days when we think about digital and cyber threats, people think it's too big, that they can't do anything about it. And this is a real pet peeve of mine, and I think it's actually quite dangerous, because if you go to somebody and say, this thing is too big, you can't understand it, you're disempowering them. You're disempowering average folks, you're disempowering businesses, you're disempowering people, which is terrible. So that's really the goal of the lab, is to say, okay, here are these threats, and granted that they're out there, but now we've got 10 years. So what can government do? What can military do? What can average citizens do? What can corporations do? And that's really the goal, is to identify them and then really give concrete next steps.
Fantastic. And, I'm just want to follow up on this thread a little bit here, because one thing, I mean, I've looked at threats. I myself, I've futures training. I don't do active futures. I'm just hosting this podcast right now, but I'm very aware of what it's like to sort of build models and understand what are the threats that are out there. One thing that I happen to see whenever I actually look into possible futures is that sometimes as futurists, we don't do a good job at looking at the unintended consequences of either these threats or events that we create. And just to give an example, we could talk about maybe Marshall McLuhan's tribal drum, right? And I think when we think about it now, it's less a drum and it's more this tribal 808 beat machine that is completely affecting human dynamics really across the world, maybe in this, the neo world of fake news. How does threat casting help to kind of understand these mitigated consequences of our future actions? And do you think that unintended consequences is something that maybe we don't do a good job of envisioning as futurists?
Well, see, that's the funny thing, Chris, about unintended consequences, is they're unintended, right? It's the part of futurism and future casting and long-term strategic foresight that confounds a lot of people, right? How do you know the things that you don't know? Which is, it's kind of a logic hole, right? The fact is you don't, and you can't, but that's okay. There is a large range of uncertainty in the future. Now, one of the things that future casting and threat casting can do is define a wide swath of the future that is definable, things that we know. We know certain things about technology. We know certain things based on social science around human behavior. We know certain things around cultural history. So there's a lot that we know. And we actually know more than we don't know. Now, with that said, what threat casting does is it starts to define that, starts to come up with those actionable steps. But the next step in using these frameworks is they're not just a process for taking a complex, disparate amount of information and synthesizing it down into both positive and negative futures and then figuring out what actions to take. It now becomes a framework or a lens through which you can start looking at events. Oftentimes I tell my students, when you're talking about unintended consequences or black swans, think of them like a natural disaster. So what do we know about natural disasters? Well, number one, they're going to happen. We know, because natural disasters happen, we know they're going to happen. So let's just say, like an earthquake on the west coast of the United States of America, right? And so we know that's going to happen. We just don't know when. Same thing with unintended consequences. We know they're going to be out there. We just don't know what it's going to be. Same thing with the black swan. We know these events will happen. We just don't know when. So oftentimes what threat casting and future casting can do is create a culture. So you would never respond to a earthquake on the west coast of the United States a month before it happened, because you wouldn't know that it was going to happen. But Similarly, you wouldn't respond to it a month after it happened because that would be ridiculous. What you do is the moment you see it, the moment you're sensing it, you go find it and you identify it. You say, okay, this thing is happening. Now, based upon the model, based upon the futures that we have defined, based upon our next steps, does this matter? Because oftentimes unintended consequences, things will happen and they actually don't matter at all. And then you can say, well, maybe it does matter. Okay, so what's the magnitude of it? What does it then do to my model? And so it gives you a framework to process it. So part of this work is not only coming up with the models, but then being diligent and always be out there, always looking, always sensing. And when you come up with a new piece of information, and certainly something that was unintended, look at the model and say, how does it affect it? Because one of the things that I teach my students and also with all of the corporate clients that I work with is I tell them that once you have done this, once you have done a future casting or a threat casting and you've built out these models, your number one goal is to break it. Because she or he who breaks the model first wins because then you fix it first. And so there's this culture and this rigor of always going out there and always continuing looking for new data and new information and looking at its effect on your model. I think that's the thing, as any futurist or really anybody who's done this type of work will tell you, the most dangerous thing is falling in love with your own models. And so that's the ultimate goal, is to say, well, is it broken? Can we break it? And that's one of the things that certainly at when I was at the Intel Corporation, we broke our model multiple times. And that is the healthy thing. That's actually when you know that you're doing the right work.
Well, so Brian, I teach a futures course for the University of Georgia. I'm a professor at UGA, and that's something that we talk about a lot, is strategic foresight. So I teach it to MBA students as part of their curriculum for their MBA program. So one thing that I try to do is get business leaders to start thinking about these types of things, because in a lot of organizations that I've been in, they don't. So my question for you would be, now that you are leading this lab and teaching these students, do you see futures work increasing in the future? Like, as far as more and more organizations are asking for students with these skills and to develop these types of things, business leaders, is this something that you see that can continue to only grow? I mean, where do you see the future of this threat casting and future studies, in the near future?
That's a great question, Jack. Really what you're asking is what's the future of futurists?
Yes.
And it's a great question. So, and it's one that I've only recently has been really fun to answer. So I've been doing this about 25 years. And right when I started, a lot of the programs and teaching just wasn't out there, right? And I came at this via engineering and systems design. And certainly came up with a background in sort of multidisciplinary studies, but sort of coming from that world. And when I started, when people called you a futurist, they did it with contempt. They would say, my joke with a lot of folks was that my title shouldn't be futurist, it should be okay futurist, because people would just lean into you because there was this spite behind their voice that you somehow could be so arrogant as to say that you knew the future and they didn't. And I would always try to tell people that's not the type of futurist I am. I'm a pragmatic futurist. Number one, I don't make predictions. I work with organizations to do that. I say that all the time. I would never be so arrogant as to come into your organization or your business and say, I'm a futurist and I know your future. That's ridiculous. What I can do as a futurist, and what trained foresight professionals could do, is we have the tools and the processes and procedures to work with you to model these futures and figure out how to get there. Oftentimes I tell people, I know it sounds a little weird, but if not us, then who? At least somebody who's trained in doing this. So I can tell you, Jack, that the future of futurists is really bright, and for a number of different reasons. So I have been amazed at the generation that has just kind of come through university and the one that's just coming in. So as we move from the millennials to the next generation, which some are calling Gen Z, they think futurists are cool. Like, they want to be futurists. And that's great because, again, the baby boomers had this contempt for futurists. Additionally, you're beginning to see the corporate offices like C-suites understanding that they need to be future ready, understanding and seeing over the past 10, 15 years, the change and the pace of change means that you really need to have a group or a person who is constantly kind of thinking about this stuff, at least so that the organization is prepared. And in many proposals and in many requests I've seen, I actually get calls from people who say, this proposal actually says you need a person who's trained as a futurist to actually do this work. They've actually written it down. And then people Google Futurist and then come up with me, so they call me. So it's really funny. It's been a huge, almost tectonic shift. And I'll finish it off by telling you. So I've been very fortunate. I spent a lot of time in my career talking to the press and kind of explaining what we do as futurists. And there was a journalist who I have worked with and has interviewed me for over 20 years and based in the UK, again, where they call you a futurologist. And he was just downright mean to me. The questions and they always would try to catch you in a lie or try to prove that you were wrong. And I understood what they were doing and that it was important. And he was doing an interview with me last year, and we were done, and we were talking about a new book of mine or something. And then we were done with the interview, and he paused and he said, "Brian David, I got to say something." It's like, what's that? And he goes, "You won." "What do you mean?" He goes, "You won." He said, "I have made fun of you for almost 2 decades. And now there's more and more and more futurists." And I had to tell him, it's not about winning. Actually, again, the future involves all of us. But it's even to have a hardcore sort of English journalist kind of acquiesce and go, "Oh, okay, the world might need futurists." I actually found it a pretty big win.
I hope so. We have a podcast to keep going, right, Jack? I don't want us to go away.
Yeah, well, and that's a question I get asked a lot whenever I tell someone I'm a futurist that I teach strategic foresight. One of their first questions is, "Okay, smart guy, what's the future?" And so then I have to explain, well, what do you mean? Because I like to, and I like how you put it, because I consider myself a social scientist first, meaning that I research what people and organizations are going to do, how they think, and then I make predictions, and like I said, very loose predictions based off of that research. And I'd like other people to build on that. And I think in Futurists, we as a community to do that. And I think that's great. I mean, I guess I have a follow-up question for you too on this is I'm really interested to see what type of future work you do for corporations, because both Chris and I have worked in the private sector, and I still work in the private sector as a consultant. And I see that more and more of my students are coming up to me and asking, what can I do with this? I can understand that this can be used in my business, but how do I use this, market this as a marketable skill? I mean, what do you do for corporations that maybe is where that specific that area is growing?
So again, a great example being the work that I did at Intel, right? Coming up with, using long-term strategic foresight and the tools of a futurist to give them enough information to be able to go and build a product. I am brought in by organizations. As you can imagine, a lot of my work is confidential. I have sort of ironclad confidentiality, as it should be. But I've been very fortunate in the past few years that I've had some clients actually come out and talk about the work that we've done together. There's a group called 9 Billion Schools that came out of a group called SHP. We were looking at the future of education in the built environment. They're a group of architects who were thinking about the future and thinking about the future of, again, education and what it meant to building, but it was much larger. And they were thinking about the future of their firm, but something even bigger. And through the work that we've done together for years, they came up with this idea for a foundation where they realized that this idea that 9 billion schools, that everybody should have a school of their own as they think about the future of education. And it's one that would follow them throughout their life and that would value not only their community, but also value them as a human being. So it really kind of changed not only their firm, but it also changed how they thought about education in general. But what I would tell your students is that is an incredibly marketable degree. Some of my students have gone on to be the futurist at Capital One Bank. I've had another one who is the futurist at Ancestry.com. So there's a lot of different places where you can go and apply it. And I think it's only happening more and more and more.
Yeah. And then, of course, I mean, I got a futures degree. I followed up with MBA, and, now I work inside of technology, helping to create, products and strategies and services, when it comes to incorporating the future. So there's a lot of ways that you can sort of get in there and get your futures hands dirty. So it's great that we're talking about all this. So I want to actually kind of pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about some of your work that you've done in the past, and more specifically your 2010 book, Screen Future, which I think is actually a pretty apt conversation to have right now. And you can talk a little bit about your work, but essentially, it's how people and technology and economics were going to shape the evolution of entertainment and in turn the world. And I think we're kind of seeing that a little bit, right? Especially in 2018, we've got all these screens in our hand, and toddlers are picking up Minecraft at 4 years old, and our obsession with social media is possibly driving election and worldwide criminalities. I mean, just Screen Future really hit us, but in maybe ways that we never understood. And you could even say maybe even perhaps the presidency, or perhaps even world governments around the world are they're using these screen futures to entertain themselves, perhaps to a fault. Is there anything that you think that your book Screen Future said that has real resonance today that maybe people didn't read necessarily back in 2010?
Chris, I'm glad you brought that up. I was actually going to bring it up when Jack was talking about people sort of thinking about futures and how that might change, because that's one of the books that I point to when people say, well, because everybody wants to know what's your average. Like, I tell people I do 10 years out, and I've been doing this for 25 years. And so, they're like, well, how you doing? Or my biggest one, when I would talk to the press when I was at Intel, they would say, how long have you been at Intel? And I would say, oh, I've been there 8 years. And they're like, well, you do 10 years out, so you think you're going to have a job in a few years? Which is pretty funny. Of course, being there for over a decade, I was able to kind of silence some of those. And that's exactly what Screen Future was for. So I also believe, as foresight professionals and futurists, we have to write it down, right? We have to be transparent. We have to be accountable to the futures that we model. And that was the idea behind Screen Future. So, Chris, as you were saying, so Screen Future, I was written about the work that I was doing in 2005, 2006, 2007, looking out to the far off future of 2015, right? And that was the idea of saying, well, what would happen? And the premise of it is to say that you would see the screenification of computational power, right? That if you had a screen, a way for people to interact with it, if you had some computational power, connection to an internet, some power and some memory, that you would then have a screen and a computing device that you could act and interact with. And it wouldn't matter if it was on your wall or in your pocket or on your desk. And again, back in 2005, this was radical. Like, people were like, that's insane, right? We're going to watch movies on our phones. This was even kind of pre-iPhone. People thought it was nuts. And actually, even being at Intel when I wrote it, I was afraid I was going to be shown the door. Where people were like, what do you mean? Computers are not used for television or social networking. They're used for important things like email and spreadsheets. And I was very fortunate, because the chief technology officer, Justin Ratner, at the time said, wow, you really pissed a whole bunch of people off. You should keep doing that. Like, there's probably something there. And that was the idea behind Screen Future, that to say that we would have this sort of screenification. And a lot of it is about that. And of course, as we moved to 2015, it happened. We were surrounded by screens and that idea. And that is, I think, the tricky part of being a good futurist, is when the future happens, it doesn't blow your mind. It just feels like Tuesday. Right? Mm-hmm. You can't be astonished every time you walk out the door. Every time you walk up to your television and you can now watch a movie on Netflix, it shouldn't blow your mind, right? It should just be like, oh, cool, I want to watch it, right? Or I want to watch this TV show. And a lot of that, I think, was in it. To your point, one of the areas at the back of the book was around social TV, and that is a part, even in the book, and even when I was going on the book tour for that, I said that we could even write a whole other book on this notion of social TV, using these screens as a way for us to be social. And I think that's really what you've been seeing as we moved, from 2014 to 2015, and certainly as we moved into today, that these screens are becoming a platform by which we are acting and interacting with each other in really different ways, and in really fundamentally different ways. We're still social and we're still being social, but the scope and scale of that is really changing. And we are seeing it move into every aspect of our lives. We're seeing it move into politics, certainly economics, certainly as you have a generation who has only ever lived in a screen future, they're developing different norms. I don't think this is a bad thing. This is normal. The only consistent thing about human beings is that we change and we adapt. And so it is really interesting to watch those social norms being created and what it actually means to sort of grow up in this screen future. So yeah, I think that it was really, really fertile ground, and it's been it's a really great way for me to people to come when they come and ask. They're like, well, how'd you do? And I'm like, well, my students have analyzed Screen Future, and I got it about 96% right.
Well, that's good. Yeah. I mean, and just in my, my quick reading of it, I was like, wow, this is really good. It's not only particularly prescient, but I think even now, as we're kind of battling between this world of like, all right, what are we going to do with all the screens? If anything, like I'm starting a new job with IBM in a week. And I told my fiance, I'm like, I'm gonna go for a hike this week. I'm not gonna bring my laptop or my phone or anything. I'm just gonna not look at a screen for 8 or 9 hours. And I think my guess is we're gonna probably have a de-screened future happen for some folks sometimes, where it's just they gotta separate themselves from that. And one group. Go ahead. Sorry.
We have to remember. You make a great point, but that's the thing I think we really need to remember. And I tell audiences this all the time. The technology doesn't get to decide. We get to decide. That this is all about humans. This is one of the things that Douglas Rushkoff, one of the sort of great, I think, intellectuals and writers today, said. He was writing about me, and he said, the thing about Brian David Johnson is he's a technological futurist that cares more about people than he does about technology, which is true. That we have to remember that it's about humans. It's always about humans. Everything we do begins and ends with humans and humanity. And there's a lot of technology and processes and procedures and corporations, but it's always about people. And we can't forget that. And when we forget that, when we don't put humans at the center, that's when we get in trouble. And so I tell folks, the technology gets to decide. Even when we are starting to create autonomous technologies and artificial intelligence, we still get to decide because we get to program them. And we have to understand that, and we have to take the responsibility. There was when I was on the original book tour for Screen Future a long time ago, a gentleman in San Francisco stood up and basically said he was worried that technology was stealing his daughters from him. And I want to be clear, when he said stealing his daughters, when he said technology was stealing his daughters, when he said technology, he meant me. And he was pissed off at me because I'm the futurist for the Intel Corporation. So obviously it's my fault. And so, and he was so mad that actually the security guards started putting themselves between me and him. And I kind of calmed everybody down and said, wait a minute. I understand that you're upset. Number one, you're upset because technology is stealing your girls away. And he said, yeah, he was worried that they weren't having social interactions. So all the things, Chris, that you were saying, that you weren't having these social interactions and that the screens, they wouldn't have a good full life. And I said, number one, good. Do that. You care about your daughters and you want them to have a good and healthy future. We need more of that. So do that. Now let's talk about this screen and this technology. I said, you get to decide. And he wasn't buying it. I said, let me give you a cultural history example. I said, sir, are you a family who watches TV while you eat dinner or not? And he goes, oh no, we don't watch TV. And I said, great. That's a decision you make as a dad. It's a decision you make as a family. But you get to make the decision. The TV doesn't care if it's on or off. You make that decision. And so I think ultimately when it comes down to this, we have to understand that we're making the decisions. And I think what we're seeing these days is technology can hold a very harsh mirror up to us. And it can show the nastier side of us. It can show us, you know what, maybe I don't want to talk to this person, so I'm actually going to look at my phone. Right. And what we need to understand, it's not the screen that's doing that. It's us. And I think more and more, I agree with you, Chris, people are taking power over that. And we need to continue to make those decisions.
That's wonderful. I think that's a wonderful insight too for us to share. Sadly, though, I still want people to listen to this podcast, especially if you're going for a run or anything along. Feel free to listen to some future podcast, and then disconnect from your from your screens and whatnot. I'm just kidding. So yeah, talk a little bit more about the people part of Futures, which I think is really cool, and that's actually a really great compliment from Doug Rushkoff. So kudos to you there. But one thing I see a lot of your work, in the work you do with Will I Am, your robot book, you're really drawn to having youth and young people exploring futures and exploring, the possible future worlds. What is it about the minds of the youth that you think allows them to explore these spaces so well?
I think when it comes to young minds, they're not jaded yet. That's the thing I tell most CEOs when they say, hey, BDJ, how do I prepare for the future? And I said, well, it's easy. Get yourself a 13-year-old mentor. Because The 13-year-old mentor, and I've throughout my career have had many 13-year-old mentors, and it's the dangerous part about having a 13-year-old mentor is it also marks how old you are, because now a lot of my 13-year-old mentors are now out and actually working and having sort of great success in their lives. But it's so important because they're not carrying the baggage of the previous generation, right? They've got one foot in still being a kid, and they got one foot in being a teenager, which means they don't care what you think, which is awesome because they think you're an idiot. And that's great because there's a little bit of truth to that. And if you give them the right platform, you can really watch their minds flower if you enable them. Because I sit down with them and I don't say, hey, you're the future. I don't say that at all. They hear that all the time. What I tell them is, I need you more than you need me. You are going to build these futures, not me. I'm just an old white dude now, right? It's my job to empower you with the tools so you can go and build that future. So you need to tell me what you want. You need to tell me the future you want and the future you want to avoid. You need to tell me what to build. And also what I love about them is then once you empower them, I'm a huge fan of crazy ideas, right? And everybody likes good ideas, right? And creative ideas and imaginative ideas. But what they don't understand is what comes with that is not only good ideas, but really bad ideas, crazy ideas, dumb ideas. But the thing about crazy ideas is they're only crazy until somebody figures out it's genius. And so I try to get people fostering these crazy ideas. And if anybody has ever been around a kid, you know, they're full of crazy ideas. And I think a great example, as you mentioned, like from my robot book, 21st Century Robot, we kind of took it out, and it's a way for kids to imagine, design, and write about robots and draw robots and then go and build them. And so we went on, I spent a lot of time in schools kind of talking to kids about them. And there's this one kid, his name was Cole, and he was building this robot, and he had drawn it. It was a quadruped robot, so it looked kind of like a spider, but he had made it look like a steampunk. So I'd also have written stuff about steampunk. So it was a Steve the Steampunk Robot. So it had a top hat and it had a monocle. And I was like, oh, that's great, Cole. It's really cool looking. It's a crawler robot that doesn't look creepy. That's a big deal. Wow, that's really cool. And I said, well, what does Steve the Steampunk Robot do that no other robot's going to do? And he goes, my robot's going to tell jokes. I was like, oh, cool. I said, that's great. I said, is your robot going to tell dumb jokes or really funny jokes? And he looked at me like I was the biggest idiot in the world. And he's like, BDJ, he's going to have a switch on the back of his head. And it's going to say dumb jokes and good jokes. And you can flip it. And he can do both. And I thought that was just incredible. I mean, it was a toggle switch that said, bad jokes and good jokes. And it was just amazing. And to me, here's Steve the Steampunk Robot with a switch that tells different jokes. It was just so beautiful. And so you watch these young minds come up with these robots, and they don't do the dishes and they don't fight. They sing songs and they build Legos with them, and they make these kind of social robots. And that's the thing to me that I just find so exciting, is the stuff that they come up with has such a breath of fresh air to it. It's not so jaded. It's not so dystopic. And again, I'm a big fan of dystopia. I mean, I'm the director of the Threatcasting Lab, for heaven's sakes, and I get darkness, but there needs to be this sort of incessant optimism about what we can do. And as you work with young minds, it's not only there, but I try to find to encourage it, right? I don't want to go to them and say, oh, kid, your dreams are going to be crushed one day. It's like, no, you're going to build the future, and I'm going to help you to do it. So you tell me what you want, and then I'll help you to do it.
Well, so Brian David, I love that, and that's kind of actually segueing into the question that I had for you. And well, I'm first going to ask you about your book, War Wizards and Robots, that you wrote with will.i.am. But I also wanted to delve deeper into that. I mean, you can explain us, give us like a brief summary of what that's about. But one thing that I find fascinating is that you both write what you consider science fact and science fiction, because I think a lot of futurists get into futures work based off of their love of science fiction or their love of science fiction movies, et cetera. Can you give us a little bit about your recent book that I know was just recently published, and working with will.i.am and about science fiction in general and why you write it? Working with will.i.am and about science fiction in general and why you write it.
Definitely, yeah. So Wizards and Robots, War. It actually came out January 25th. So yes, it came out 4 days ago. And it's about wizards and robots. It's this sort of big action-packed story around wizards and robots and this epic battle between the two of them that spans centuries. And the fate of the Earth lays in the hands of one teenage engineer girl, Ada Luring. Definitely a nod to Ada Lovelace. And it's this story about Ada and her kind of coming to grips with her role in this. And then there's a wizard by the name of Geller, who's sort of the last wizard who is her age. And so it's about their relationship and sort of their role in this sort of massive, almost cosmic battle between them. And the thing that I tell folks when Will and I were writing it is that it's all real. So all the robots are real. They're all based upon my 21st century robots. I just extrapolated out hundreds and thousands of years of what these might be like. And it kept the idea and at its core around who these robots could be and what they could be like. And then on the magic side with the wizards, all the magic is based on quantum physics. And so a lot of it's based on entanglement, and all the way down to the fact that, we even have casting spells around how you would cast it, and the wizards have prisms they have prism rings, because that's how you do quantum entanglement, is you actually put it through a prism, and how you can throw with the entanglement and create these weapons. And so you can play it out. And certainly when we were doing our world building for the book, there's a lot of detail, so much so that our publisher got a little freaked out, because you started looking at different areas and saying, well, wizards are real. So look back at history and see any time that a king won a battle that he shouldn't have won, that's because he had a wizard. Because the most powerful thing that proves that wizards exist is because nobody thinks they exist. And so we went back and we sort of built this very, very large world building book around wizards and robots. And yeah, that's really the idea. And working with Will was absolutely amazing. And people say, how did you meet Will I Am? And I said, I met him at work. It's pretty easy. I mean, we were both working at Intel. Again, the CTO at the time said, hey, I think you'd like this guy. We hung out. We started talking about my robots that I was building, and he had some ideas. And then what happened is I actually went off on vacation, and my wife and I went through Slovenia and Croatia, and we're kind of touring things in there. And we got back, and Will called me, and he said, oh, BDJ, I had this idea about wizards and robots in this epic battle. And he goes, oh, and the thing about the wizards is they hide out underground. And I paused, and I was like, Will, I know where that castle is. It's Prejama Castle in Slovenia. And he's like, what? And I was like, I was just there. It's actually a castle in the side of a rock, and there's these caverns that go inside. That's actually where the wizards could be. And he kind of paused, and he's like, oh, you got to come down here. So I actually went down to his house, and we sat in his living room in Los Angeles on Halloween about 6 years ago, and just spec'd really out the entire cycle of the book and the entire world, and it really just grew from there.
I just like to thank you actually for your passion. It's really great. What we really try to get as many futurists here on this podcast as possible. And, I think your passion for not only the knowledge and the dissemination of futures, but also the ability to kind of bridge the gap between maybe stodgy future studies and, of course, the burgeoning youth culture, and getting them excited about the future of the world, the future of technology. Embracing it with entertainers like Will I Am. It's just great. Thank you so much for joining our podcast. Is there anything that you want to share with us? Any upcoming projects that you want to talk about besides the new book?
No, thank you, Chris. That was very nice of you. No, I would just say Wizards and Robots. Go check it out. The book is out now. You can get the Kindle version. You can also get the audiobook. I recorded part of the audiobook. Yeah, have a look at it. I'm super excited. The initial feedback's been great, and I'm actually about to go on a book tour in the next couple of days to actually go and meet those young minds.
Thanks so much for joining the podcast. We really do appreciate you. And again, thanks so much for coming and joining the conversation.
Chris and Jack, it was a pleasure. Thank you.